All right, so here we are with Cheyenne, is it? Am I getting that?
Cheyenne Wall-Grimes, yes.
Okay, good. I want to make sure I was pronouncing that correctly. With Game Chef for this year. So if you could start off by telling us a little bit about what Game Chef is and how it's changing this year.
So Game Chef is a competition that happens yearly. It's been going on since 2002. And the big thing is you get one theme, 4 ingredients, and 9 days. And so the way that this works is every year we give kind of a general theme, and then we give 4 ingredients, in which 2 to 3 of those ingredients must be incorporated into the game. You can have 9 days. This year it's going to be June 13th through the 21st. You are to write a fully fleshed out, playable analog role-playing game.
Wow.
So think along the lines of tabletop thing. As long as it fits the theme and has 2 to 3 ingredients, you will look at everything. One of the big things that we've been doing over the past couple of years is we now have different language coordinators, so that way you can enter into the competition in English, Brazilian, Portuguese, Korean, Russian, French, Italian, Slovenian, and Polish.
Holy
and
smokes.
Adding Spanish. And so what we do is every single breakdown of language has coordinators that look through things. And when you sign on to do Game Chef, once you have entered your game at the end of the time, you then are given a few other games from other people that have written games that year and do peer reviews. So that way you get feedback from other game designers, and then we have judges and language coordinators that look through all the titles, pick kind of finalists through each one. Every single language has a winner, and then we come up with a world winner. Last year, actually, it was from Korea. They actually won last year. So
nice. So I was actually gonna... Go ahead.
It's not just an English-dominated competition.
Yeah.
A big thing, because a lot of people think, oh, you know, this isn't for me, but really it's a worldwide event. So.
Absolutely. And I was actually curious about that. How do you handle that once you have the winners across countries? How can you judge things across multiple languages?
So one of the things that we do is when we have language coordinators, they translate the games into English.
Okay.
So that way things can be read, and we can communicate amongst ourselves, and it ends up being a really cool thing. This is actually my first year. Me and Stentor Danielson, who is actually my partner in our game business, we are the English language coordinators for the year. And so there's 2 world coordinators that kind of take care of everything, and then every single language has a coordinator. Wow. And so this is cool, and I've submitted a game before. I have a couple of friends who have won, and it's a really cool competition, so I'm super looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's interesting. So what are the responsibilities of the global coordinator versus the language coordinators?
The global coordinator does a bit of work, you know, deciding on dates. We have dates for everything. We have dates for when the rules had to be translated by, when the actual games have to be translated by, what time you get proofs in, all of that stuff. So a lot of it is just doing sort of the detail work behind the scenes, and just making sure that we get the word out there about it. Because like I said, you know, we're up to 8 languages this year. It would be great if we could get 20 languages and a couple hundred entries from every language. That would be amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's one of the cool things about Game Chef is that it's really a marketplace for innovative game designs, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And talk, please.
That was the main focus when it started, was just to get people, whether or not, no learning curve to this. If you the ingredients and go, oh wow, I can incorporate that into this and I can make this thing happen, awesome. Please try, because we appreciate anyone at any level of game design to come in. If you've never even give it a shot, you never know, it might end up winning.
Absolutely.
there's games that have absolutely been published that were submitted to Game Chef. Like it's a thing. It really does happen. So, you know, we really try to be as inclusive as possible and try to reach out to anyone in any group. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. If you create a game, we welcome you. So
cool. So that was actually one of the questions I had is, so for those watching this who maybe aren't hugely familiar with tabletop role playing, maybe they've played a game with a friend or heard about it, maybe they haven't even played before. What are some games you suggest or resources you suggest for folks to kind of get a feel for what they'd be getting into?
Okay. Yeah, it's such a big world.
I know,
Now,
yeah.
when I say, oh yeah, I do tabletop RPGs, people go, oh, like Dungeons and Dragons. That's always immediately where everyone goes. There is nothing wrong with Dungeons and Dragons. If that is what you want to play and be happy. Personally, I'm into a little bit more of the indie RPG world, which is a little bit more on the side of things that Game Chef tends to be. Some great things that I always suggest beginners to check out is Apocalypse World, which is a really lovely streamlined system that you just roll 2d6. You have a couple of stats you add your rolls to, and it's really narrative, really all about character interactions. And also it has a million hacks off of it where you can play Dungeon World, which is basically a dungeon crawl. You can play Monsterhearts, which is supernatural teenagers. There's a lot. There's lots of good games out there. It's a really easy system, and I love it. It depends on what you want. There's a lot of diceless systems. There's a lot of things like Ganakagok or The Quiet Year. Those are really good ones that are way more about actual storytelling than it is anything else. And then, you know, there's stuff for everything. When I was prepping for this interview, knowing that, you know, looking at a little bit more otaku stuff, I looked up a few things. There's some really great systems out there, actually, to try to emulate things like anime and things like that. Like OVA is a really great system. And, you know, if you want more Final Fantasy-like stuff, you want to look at Anima Prime. If you want like a dating sim, there's Girl X Boy. There's a lot of things. If you, as a game designer personally, I've always been told, if you want to make the game, make it because there will be an audience. There is somebody out there that likes the thing you do, and there will be a game. And you can make it, and it's fine because people will buy it, and it's awesome.
Well, absolutely. And actually, to that point, and as a game designer, like, do you have tips for folks who are starting to design for the first time, kind of where to start with a game design?
Funny story. I actually came up with the idea for a game in the shower today. And
Excellent.
so
Yep.
I started the design process earlier today. And really what it is if you have an idea that you're like, man, it would be super fun to get to play this game, just start thinking about it. Think about what would be fun, what you do want to actually explore with it. If you want it to be much more about the story end of things, awesome. Come up with what needs to happen for that to be facilitated. If you want it to be about character interactions, come up with a system, you know, to be able to create your characters and make sure that there's conflict and intrigue between them and make sure they interact. So really just kind of pinning down what you want out of gameplay is probably the best thing to start. Don't get wrapped up in, you know, oh boy, I want it to be this system or whatnot. Because sometimes you look at a game and then you eventually realize, oh wow, that fits beautifully into this D20 system. Why don't I just make it a hack? Or sometimes it's, oh, I need to create this entire new mechanic system. And that's something for later down the road. Flesh out as much as you can about the world and what you actually want out of gameplay. And it makes a big difference, because at that point, once you know what you're doing, the rest will fall into place.
I totally agree. What are your thoughts on sort of where to place the die rolls? I know a lot of people get kind of caught up in that in terms of, well, you got to roll a die here, you got to roll a die here, and do you have to roll a die here? And where do you often do that in your games, and what would you suggest to other folks?
Oh goodness. So I know personally, I like to play games where the roles that I make are based on decisions that the character makes.
Mm,
Um, there's a lot of systems where it's like, okay, you're even thinking about doing this thing, so I need you to roll to see if you can even
mm.
come up with the idea of doing that. It's a little bit more crunchy than I personally like, but that's me. I'm really, really into like the more narrative storytelling games. It's definitely my wheelhouse. And so, like I mentioned before, Monsterhearts, it's one of my favorite games. I absolutely love it. And it's, you know, when you're about to do something, you roll.
Mm.
So a lot of times it's really good to make it for actions.
Yeah.
If you can roll and it causes something to happen, not that it's a yes or no answer, it could be a yes and it goes well, or no, but you get what you want, but there's a cost. That's what I find most compelling in gameplay. So
Gotcha. Interesting. So it's more when a character is attempting something. Obviously not
yeah,
everything, but okay. Gotcha.
yeah,
Interesting.
I think that ends up coming up with really compelling gameplay and makes for better storytelling.
Yeah.
But sometimes people get so caught up in, oh, I can only use this weapon at this time, and you know, sometimes it brings everything to a grinding halt. It's a thing. It's okay. So,
Exactly. Exactly. So what are some of the things that you've seen in Game Chef that have really excited you? Games, concepts, things like that that are kind of like, this is why we have Game Chef.
um, so I ended up not being able to submit a game last year, but actually the theme for last year was there is no book, meaning that you need to think outside of traditional game mechanic norms. That was kind of what they were going with last year. And the ingredients were absorb, wild, glitter, and sickle. And so every year they try to give you four really off the wall things that have nothing to do with each other and try to bring stuff up. Um, I actually have a friend who submitted a game last year that you ended up chatting with people at a party, and based off of who you were in factions with or like people you trusted, you would paint your nails specific colors to go
Wow.
along with other people. So that incorporated like the glitter aspect of it. Like seriously, you walk around you sit there at a table pretending to walk around the room and you end up painting your nail. So really cool to just be able to see what kind of creative off the wall mechanics that people can come up with,
Mhm.
because I mean there's a lot of different things that you can do. There are games that use tarot cards as a
Yeah.
way to come up with your characters. There's there's a lot of stuff, and I'm always pulled to things that have more interesting mechanics like that. I mean, I love dice, don't get me wrong. I am so happy to hear the sound of dice rolling on the table. But when you can come at me with a game that has a really neat mechanic to get everyone into the story, I always appreciate it. So I think it's just really cool that even if your game doesn't win, I know a lot of people, especially on G Plus communities and stuff like that, since Google Plus has been taken over by gamers. It's really great because everyone will be like, here's my submission this year. And, there's been a couple more contests that have come out, like the 200-word RPG challenge.
Yeah, that was fun.
That was really cool. So nice to actually give constraints to be able to come up with as many things as possible. It's really great to even just see what everybody else produces.
Yeah.
Because sometimes somebody will say something you've never even thought of before.
Yeah.
That's the big thing, is we just want as much creativity and as much ideas about what could happen with gaming to come out of this as possible.
Totally. Are there any particular mechanics that you've come across in Game Chef or otherwise that have really like excited you? Been like that fits perfectly?
Well, sadly, I haven't. This is my first year with Game Chef,
Oh,
so
sure.
I
Yeah.
haven't gotten to see a whole bunch of stuff. But as a designer, I do go to a lot of conventions and stuff like that. And there's a great one in November up in New Jersey that Double Exposure does, called Metatopia.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a game design con for game designers. You go and play test your games with other industry professionals, have them give you feedback. And so many creative things. People using note cards that there was one person controlling the main character who was having a dream, and everybody else would describe the dream, but that person got to choose like 3 words that were used in the dream, and then they would read it out.
Interesting.
There was a lot of really neat stuff that comes out of it. So again, I like the weird stuff. I'm I'm personally into kind of like the dirty hippie indie game. So I like the weird stuff. Though the more interesting you can come at me, I usually appreciate it. So
Absolutely. Well, I remember the first time I saw someone playing running Dread, and yeah, just sitting at a table and hearing people talk. Whoa.
No, there is a physical manifestation of anxiety and terror in the middle of the table, and it's a Jenga tower. It's the most like innocent thing, but man, you play a Dread game and you're up walking around pacing because you have this nervous energy and you're terrified to touch that tower. Oh god, Dread is amazing.
And then you start watching everyone else who's pacing and making sure they don't get near the table so they don't accidentally knock it.
Oh goodness, I've had friends run it at a lot of conventions. There's a group called Games on Demand, where you sign up to GM and you give a couple of games that you're willing to run, and then when people come, they pick what game you run, and then you go and run it. Like you don't know what you're going to run.
Wow.
In its time, and a lot of times Dread gets run because everybody wants to play it. And I have walked through halls where people are making like a 10-foot barrier around the table. They're like, we are 42 pulls in. You are not knocking this tower over. I am not dying. It's really cool. And actually, I just watched the Tabletop because they just did a double episode featuring Dread.
Nice.
Such a good way to show and get people into that game. It's lovely. I love that game. So
awesome. I'll have to track that down. I didn't realize they'd done Dread this year. That's great.
Yeah.
That's very cool. It's funny you mentioned earlier when I came across The Quiet Year. Somebody described it to me. I finally bought it, and I remember it arrived, and I opened it up, and I was like, "What is this?" And I started going through the cards and realized, "Oh, this is brilliant."
Yeah.
That whole idea of having the cards but organized according to season. That fits.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and that's I mentioned before Ganakagok. You're like an Eskimo-esque people who have never seen the sun, and there's a prophecy that the sun is coming up, and you have to figure out what that means. You don't know if it's good or bad, and everybody at the table forms a map together of what their area looks like and what ecological things you're going to deal with and things like that. And it's just there's so many things that can be done. And, like I said, I love dice, but there's a lot of creativity right now going on with a lot of diceless games and GM-less games also. That's been a big trend recently, is trying to come up with games where you don't have one person specifically in charge.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty cool when you get to do stuff like that. So there's a lot of creativity out there.
Absolutely. And one of the nice things too about this is that because you don't have much time to build a 500-page, rule book, you're going to generally be led down the direction of that thing where you don't necessarily, or it's easier to design a game without a GM, because then you're not talking to 2 different people at once and trying to explain, okay, here's all the things GM does, and all those weirder ideas have more space to flourish.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And there was another competition similar to this that they're doing for freeform LARP now that's called the Golden Cobra.
Cool.
And it was pretty cool. And I got to play in a couple of the games at Metatopia this year, including one that's called Still Life. You're a rock. You decide what kind of rock you are. You have a question that you're supposed to answer, and the GMs are elemental forces that like have a river come or an earthquake or something and move you around. And whenever you're in touching distance of another rock, you can talk, but that's it. Otherwise, you're silent and you're contemplating your question.
Wow.
That is not like when a lot of people think of LARPs, they either think of Boffers or they think of, World of Darkness or stuff like that. That's way more involved and has backstory. That's just such an elegant little game that it sounds like nothing, but then I was so impressed playing it. I was just like, wow, this is actually really deep, and I appreciate that I did it. So
What's the name of that again?
Cool. That competition is called Golden Cobra.
Golden Cobra.
And it takes place later in the year. I think last year it was in like September or October. I should have looked it up. But yeah, no, it's a really cool competition. So it's kind of the analog to Game Chef, only for freeform LARP.
Gotcha.
So
yeah.
It's definitely something to check out.
Cool. So are there any particular things that you'd like to see explored in Game Chef personally? Like not as a, here are the themes, but stuff, settings or concepts that would be kind of just interesting for folks to explore.
Oh, geez. So one thing that I'm personally kind of moving towards is writing games that have a good sense of humor. I think a lot of times people want to be really serious in their gameplay, and believe me, I understand having games about social problems and things like that. It's excellent. It's good things to explore. You learn a lot about yourself dealing with these things in game. But being able to be silly and out there with stuff always makes me really happy. And so that's something I look forward to seeing, those kinds of games where it's just like, this is silly. I want to play this and be insanely happy while I play it. So
absolutely.
Other things, I don't know.
And it's tough. For me as an anime fan, I'd love to see folks explore more the weird, wacky romantic relationships you often see in those sorts of stories. I think people generally just really shy away from playful, back and forth relationships of will they, won't they.
Actually, there's a really neat game that my friend Sarah Williamson wrote. The name is escaping me, but you play two people on a first date, and it's a LARP, and you split the people up into two groups. Everybody plays a different part of one of the datees' psyche.
Whoa.
And so a group conversation of making up what happens on the date, and you go on several dates. And so that just makes me ridiculously happy, because it's just such a fun thing to play with. And that's, there's actually a couple of games like that are coming out. There's an RPG that'll be up on Kickstarter later this year called Bluebeard's Bride, in which everybody plays the bride. You all play different factions of her psyche.
Interesting.
And it's powered by the Apocalypse Space, so it's just the 2d6 roll, and I've played it, and it's ridiculous. It's so fun. It's so good, and it's been really cool seeing that come out as a thing where multiple people controlling one person. That's a really fun thing to play with.
It's interesting. Getting back to the whole LARP thing, LARPs are one of those things that I'm personally fascinated by. I know a lot of folks are interested in, but they think it only happens in Norway.
It doesn't only happen in Norway.
Or at a little corner of a convention. Where can people go to find? Where can I go to find those sort of LARP experiences? So
again, how I mentioned that Google Plus has really become sort of the mecca of gaming. You could always start looking on things. I know one of the biggest factions is going to be the World of Darkness stuff. Your mage, your werewolf, that sort of stuff. So if you're into kind of those darker stories, look for local things in the cam. I mean, that's really one of the best things you can do. Personally, I like a lot of the Nordic style LARPs. I don't have any local groups that do it, but I try to do it every con that I go to, because you can actually do it there. And it's really fascinating. I think LARPing is going to start popping up more and more. I know that there is a LARP on a submarine or an aircraft carrier in Germany where you basically play out like Battlestar Galactica.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
There is a castle in the Czech Republic where you can go to the College of Wizardry. I have several friends that have traveled over there to be in the Hogwarts LARP. And I think that's great that those are starting, because I have a feeling they're going to jump the ocean. I have a feeling that we're going to see much more things like that start to pop up. And even there's a big trend right now in the pervasive game world, pervasive meaning like playing it in real time. there's a lot of these things called like lock house or safe houses, where it's like a maze that you actually have to go through, and you interact with actual actors and characters. There's also a lot more in the theater world that's actually, there was in New York City, I think it's still running, called Sleep No More, where all the audience wears masks and just roam around this mansion, room to room, and the actors are acting out Macbeth around you.
Interesting.
And you see what you want to see of the story, and you don't have to see all of it. You could follow one character and only see their side of things. So there's a lot more things like that, even just, like I said, you know, in theater, even bringing things like that. I have a feeling that LARP is going to become a little bit more respected thing in the US.
I hope so.
I know it's hard to find. Like I said, you know, I know a couple of groups around here that do World of Darkness and things like that, but that's really about all you can find. So if that's not really your thing, if it is your thing, awesome. But if it's not, you're pretty sparse on what you can find. So
yeah, I mean, it would be great to see someone try to figure out some way of doing LARPing through G+ Hangouts in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, because tabletop, for the most part, a lot of tabletop games you can do over Hangouts, and it's great. Like, I mean, you can go and download an entire like layout for playing Fiasco through Google Hangouts. It's super simple to do because they have the dice emulators, they have all that stuff. You can do it. It's really simple. And actually, we're play testing one of the games that we're getting ready to put up on Kickstarter. We're play testing it over G+, because I have all these friends all over the world that would love to play test it, but I can't get them together. And so it's easier to do it over video chat. And if you're using dice or cards, it's really easy to do. So it would be nice if LARPing could be a thing. Now, there is a lot of play-by-post stuff that goes on G+ also. So you get a little bit more where you get to describe how your character feels and what your character's thinking. And so, you know, it's kind of a nice mix between tabletop and LARPing, because you get a little bit more insights into how your character feels. So that's pretty cool. Gotcha.
Yeah. I know there's Storium out there now that folks are using for some of that as well.
Storium is cool for that.
Yeah, a friend of mine invited me to one game, and I was very impressed with just how structured it was. It's like, obviously you wouldn't want to run on every game this way, but for the kinds of games it works for, it's like, yes, this lets us play.
Yep. Yeah, cool. No, it's really cool that there's a lot. It's becoming much more prevalent doing things like this. And I know, like, in the last couple of years, it seems like geek culture has kind of become in vogue, and it's been really interesting to watch. As somebody who's been into gaming and anime and stuff all my life, it's incredible to watch it actually become part of the mainstream and be considered cool. And, you know, seeing all my friends, younger siblings, like the things that I liked, then they're cool for doing so. And it's just really funny. So
absolutely.
It's to see it all grow. So
yeah, no, totally. So what's it going to take to bring role-playing a little closer to mainstream, do you think?
It's getting there, and it's mainly because now the Will Whedons and Felicia Days of the world, like people that are actively, I mean, everybody now knows that Vin Diesel plays D&D.
True.
That's huge. And I mean, nobody is sitting there saying, I'm going to play D&D just because Vin Diesel does. But having it prominent and out there in the world, and not just, you know, images of stereotypical, you know, geeks sitting in the basement, eating Cheetos, rolling D20s. That's what you need. Things like Will Wheaton doing tabletop and stuff like that. It makes a big difference, because he can bring in people that don't look like your norm, don't look like normal, you know, what you consider to be, you know, the normal type of players. And it's been really interesting. I have several friends with children that have been getting their kids into role playing. There's so many good games out there for families and based at children. And it's great to get them into it, because as they grow up, they're going to keep doing it. And I know a lot of people will be like, well, I grew up playing D&D with my family. And that was a little bit more few and far between.
Yeah.
As opposed to what it is now. So I think getting to kids younger is really one of the best things that we can do. It's been really interesting. I used to live in Pittsburgh, and I helped run a board game meetup. And at one point I was like, we could run Fiasco.
Yeah.
Let me try it. And the guy in charge, he was like, okay, do it once, see how it goes. Everyone was shocked. They're like, I can't play a game where I tell a story where I'm a character. I can't do that. And I'm like, no. Let me show you how to play this game. And we played it, and everyone that played was like, so when are we doing this again? And I was like, that is exactly what I wanted, because that's how this works. And so now, like every couple of months, even I don't live there anymore, but they still every couple of months have a Fiasco night.
Nice.
And so, you know, it's and man, I was at Target. They sell Settlers of Catan at
That's
Target.
true. Yeah.
They're beginning to sell all these more mainstream games. And I know, you know, board games are a little bit ahead of like RPGs and things like that, but it'll follow. That's, you know, it's a thing. And so, you know, going to Barnes and Noble and seeing like, you know, they have Betrayal at House on the Hill and King of Tokyo and stuff that's a little bit more, you know, you wouldn't know about it unless you went into a game store. Now you can buy them at bookstores.
Absolutely.
So it's really cool to see it kind of branch out in that way.
Yeah. But it's also been neat seeing, I'll always applaud the D&D folks for bringing out the board games. Because I don't know if it was intentional or not, but that brought a whole board game crowd that was like, oh, I could do this.
Yeah. And even with 5th edition, the last one that they brought out, they did more of the encounters thing, which is literally you buy a box and it has everything you need. If you have never run a game before, you crack open that box and you could DM for your friends. That's huge.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people are willing to play games as long as they don't have to run them. And so that's always a thing, is trying to make sure that you can find somebody to actually GM your game, because then you can actually play something. But yeah, no, that makes such a difference, and it's such a big boost in confidence that I think that makes a huge difference. And so that is one of the kind of like hazards of getting into the more independent games, because it is, oh, I have this 150-page book that I have to read and know better than anyone else and things like that. But there's so many different things being done to make games more accessible and to make kind of the learning curve a little bit different and make it not so bad. And there is actually a pretty big push for accessibility in a whole bunch of different ways. I know there's a game called Tears of the Machine, which is like you're playing mechas piloted by teen girls. So it's
as happens,
Pacific Rim, Marcross kind of all together sort of thing. He has an interactive website where you can access all of the rules. It speaks to you. You can highlight things, all of these things. So for different visibility and hearing and, having other learning disabilities and things like that, you can still learn how to run this game.
That's
and
awesome.
I have a feeling that's going to become a much bigger thing. Actually, one of the things we're implementing this year in Game Chef is that we're going to come up with a template that is kind of a more standard way of submitting the game. Oh. And so that way it's in a different font that's a little bit more visible for people with visual issues and things like that. And we're trying to do our best to make everything as accessible as possible. That's awesome. Because there's a lot of people. When you go to a con, you see people of every single ability. And that's one of my favorite things about cons. Gaming, tabletop gaming is so great. You do not have to be physically capable of things that you can do in game. Mm-hmm. And exploring disability in games, if it's handled correctly, is great. And there's a lot of things that are going on now to make everything more accessible to everyone. And I really appreciate that. I think it's awesome. So
yeah, that is really cool. And for lots of reasons, if not just because that opens it up. It's amazing how people don't realize, that if you make it accessible to those people, then suddenly they become your champions. Yep. This is now something that they can do, and they'll proselytize it because you're suddenly making something available to them
Yep.
And I remember stumbling across this because I published one of my games in e-reader formats. Just gotta have the software.
Cool.
I said, I'll publish it out there. And somebody emailed me and said, "Thank you so much because I have problems with my hands. I can have it read it back to me." And I never even thought about that, but that happens.
There's a big push towards that, and I really think it's a great way to go.
Yeah.
Because for so long it's been there's always been this stigma of like the geeky kids that are kind of socially awkward. They're the ones that do this type of gaming. But now it's reaching such a different audience, and it's so nice to have much more accessibility and inclusion that it's great to be able to go to cons and see people of every ethnicity and every orientation can all go to the same place and get along and play games together, and it doesn't matter. It's really a super inclusive world, and diversity is a good thing in games. You don't want everybody to be a hunter. You want to have a cleric and a bard and an archer. You want to have diversity. So it's definitely something that's being appreciated in the world, and that's good.
Yeah, that's very cool. And it's something that I think Game Chef really helps to foster as well. And one of the things I think that's interesting there too is how Game Chef gets it's aiming more towards the strength. I think another one of the misconceptions folks have is that tabletop role playing means I have to show up every week for this campaign that goes on for 3 years. Yeah.
That's I really love one shots. I love games that you can play in one session. Those always make me really happy. Just because it's cool to get to know a character briefly and see what you can do with them in that time. Sometimes it's great to have a full campaign and be able to have a character that you super delve into. But every now and then it's nice to just be, maybe it's somebody that's completely different than you and you just want to try, like, what if I were a really mean person all the time? Why don't I play that for 3 hours? And at the end of it, you're probably going, oh God, I'm so glad I'm not like that. But you have a chance to do it. And it's really cool because not only is it good insight for you, but it also, the more experiences you have, and gaming can be really cathartic. Gaming can be a great way to get through emotions and feelings and things like that. And hey, why not just dump it out on the table and leave it there?
Exactly.
That's okay.
And I think you mentioned Fiasco. I think that's a great chance for that because you get to play people with poor impulse control for whom bad things happen, and you just kind of let that happen to that character.
Yeah. No, I try to be the worst person I possibly can almost every time I play Fiasco. I'm total kittens and rainbows in real life, and I just want to be awful when I play that game. So that's
totally
kind of how it goes.
Yeah. I like being either smarmy evil or incredibly stupid, because stupid is fun too in Fiasco because you just let all this stuff happen to you. And I guess so.
Because if you play the smart person in Fiasco, all you are is upset and insulted, and you don't have any fun when you're smart in that game. So.
You're being constantly frustrated by everyone else in the game, and finally there comes that point where you just pull up the gun and say, "Oh, screw it," and just start blasting everything away.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
Yeah, that's good.
Any other advice for folks who might want to get into Game Chef this year? I know nothing's been announced yet. When does that announcement come out?
So the announcement will be on June 13th. That is the day we will announce the theme and the 4 ingredients, and then you'll have 9 days to submit the game. We start the clock at the earliest time zone. Like, I think it's New Zealand time for the start, and then like Hawaii time for the end, to give everybody as much time as possible. And so, on the 13th, it'll go up on the website. If you subscribe to other social medias that are about gaming, believe me, it'll get passed around. My biggest advice, just try it. Because, if you start and you go, I don't have the time to finish this, or I don't really want to finish it. Okay, that's fine. There's no harm in that. Nothing bad will come out of it. You never know. You might finish a game. you might design a game and be able to say, hey guys, look, I designed the game. This is awesome.
Exactly.
And then you submit it and get feedback from other game designers. And it's a really super inclusive, friendly environment where everybody just wants to create what they can. Even though there's a winner chosen, it's much more about fostering a community of being supportive and helping each other out as opposed to trying to win. And so don't worry about it being a contest. Just try. That's the best advice I can give anyone. Also, we do have a Google Plus community that I'm one of the moderators of. Everybody is welcome to join it. You just go to Game Chef on Google Plus and we'll add you. Once the game competition starts, if you want to go onto the social media and say, hey, I have this idea. I'm kind of stuck with this though. Anybody got any ideas? Please get on and talk to other people. Everybody wants to talk to each other. Everybody wants to. It's a really cool thing. There's not a lot of secret, nobody's trying to keep their ideas secret. Nobody's thinking, oh, somebody's going to steal my idea. Of course, we're going to see overlap. There's 4 ingredients. People are going to come up with similar ideas. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's really more about connecting people who are interested in designing games and people who care about what's actually put out there and who, want to play really fun games. Because that's all any of us want, is to have great games to play.
There we go. Absolutely. And just to encourage people to do this, one of my most successful games was a game that I designed the day after Game Chef ended.
Nice.
One of those things where I was like, oh, I don't, well, that's interesting. What if I type this, and then it became a game, you never know.
You should always, anytime you get an idea, just write it down. You never know where it'll go.
Exactly. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This has been fantastic.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you. And take care. We'll look forward to seeing Game Chef this year. Hope you get hundreds and hundreds of submissions.
We hope so too. Thanks so much.
You bet. Take care.